After 7 years, Carlos Alcaraz and Juan Carlos Ferrero have officially parted ways. The tennis world is reeling, and the reactions from the Spanish inner circle are revealing. Tony Nadal, the architect behind Rafa's dominance, spoke to a publication, Marca, with a heavy dose of realism. Quote, "The logical thing was to continue. I'm surprised because Alcaraz finished as #1 in the world." Uncle Tony didn't stop there, highlighting the power imbalance in modern coaching, saying, "Relationships in tennis world are difficult because the one who pays, which is the player, usually pays to hear what he wants to hear. I imagine the decision is not tennis related."
Carlos Alcaraz just did something that has the entire tennis world scratching their heads in confusion.
Then a month before the Australian Open begins, and right after Carlos Alcaraz's most dominant season, he quietly posts this message online. There is no drama, no real explanation, and no warning. Juan Carlos Ferrero is gone.
After splitting with Juan Carlos Ferrero, every major coach on the planet threw their hat in the ring to work with the world #1. Big names, proven winners, legends of the sport. And Carlos looked at all of them and said, no thanks. He's going his own way, and people are absolutely freaking out about it. Here's my question. When's the last time a world #1 turned down proven champions to bet on an unproven coach? Let's talk about what just happened in the tennis world, because this situation is absolutely wild. Carlos Alcaraz and Juan Carlos Ferrero split up after 7 years together. 7 years of building one of the most successful player-coach partnerships in modern tennis. 4 Grand Slam titles, multiple #1 rankings, a playing style that literally changed how people think about modern tennis. And then, boom. One announcement and it's over. Done. Finished. No long goodbye, no gradual transition, just a clean break that nobody saw coming.
At the same time, I predicted that this was going to happen already several months ago. After watching the Netflix documentary, I just had the feeling that these two were not on the same page anymore. There were a lot of things in there that made it clear that the approach that Ferrero wanted for Carlos Alcaraz was quite different than what Carlos Alcaraz wanted for himself. The thing that stood out the most was that Ferrero always kept saying, if you want to become the best player of all time, you have to become a slave to the sport of tennis and optimize everything around your tennis. So there's almost no life outside of tennis with that approach. Ferrero is known to be a very hard worker, a tough guy that runs a tight ship at his academy. He has everything under his control. And that's how they started working together when Carlos was 13, 14 years old. And Carlos was already a huge talent. If you look at the videos from back then, you can find them on YouTube by the way, you'll see that his forehand and his backhand don't look much different than they do now at all. His serve has certainly improved a lot and his forehand and backhand have been fine-tuned, but he was already a huge talent at that age and his forehand and backhand were already phenomenally good.
Now, before we get into the chaos that followed, let's talk about what actually caused this split. Because on the surface, everything looked perfect. Carlos was winning. Ferrero was being hailed as a coaching genius. The relationship seemed rock solid, but apparently behind closed doors, things were getting messy. And not between Carlos and Ferrero directly, which is the interesting part. The tension was between Ferrero and Carlos's father.
It was a huge shock, huge for everybody. Nobody expected Carlos and Juan Carlos to break up. We had really the feeling that this collaboration was for life. At that age, when you have a very long-term collaboration, the relationship takes another turn and it becomes really almost family. It was working incredibly well, that's also a point. Carlos was crazy successful. So when you put all this together, nobody imagined that this would break at some point. The only reason why there was a doubt was the documentary on Netflix. To be able to coach well, the player needs to feel understood and the coach has to feel I can have an impact on what's important. I would make a parallel that maybe will sound strange, but it's exactly like a couple. You know, they are a married couple. You think that they are the ideal couple. You think, wow, I wish my couple would be as great as theirs. And 6 months later, they break up and everybody says, how come? This breakup between Carlos and Juan Carlos shows that nobody knows what's happening behind closed doors. It's a difficult moment for Carlos, for sure, especially being so close to a Grand Slam. Nobody can say what's going to happen.
According to reports coming out of Spain, disagreements had been building for months. We're talking about control, long-term planning, the direction of Carlos's career. All the stuff that sounds boring until it suddenly explodes and destroys everything. The final straw came when Ferrero was asked to sign a new contract. He apparently got a counter-offer from the Alcaraz camp within 48 hours. And when his response got rejected, both sides realized this wasn't a family partnership anymore. This was a business negotiation, and nobody was happy about it.
Andy Murray absolutely has to be Carlos Alcaraz's new coach, and here is why. Alcaraz recently split with Juan Carlos Ferrero after 6 years, which brought 6 Grand Slams. He'll continue to work with Samuel Lopez, but he's reportedly on the hunt for a brand new coach, and that should be Andy Murray. In 2022, Murray expressed an interest with working with Alcaraz, citing his huge potential and avid love for the sport as reasons why he would be interested. Murray famously worked with Djokovic following his retirement, and he has suggested he could return to coaching in the future. This year, Murray said he would return to coaching at some stage. He added, "I wasn't planning on going into coaching as soon as I finished playing, but it was a pretty unique opportunity. It was a chance to learn from one of the best athletes of all time." What is Carlos Alcaraz if not one of the best athletes of all time?
So they split. And immediately, the vultures started circling. And by vultures, I mean some of the most accomplished coaches in tennis history. Because here's the thing, coaching Carlos Alcaraz isn't just a job. It's a career-defining opportunity. You're working with a generational talent who's already won multiple Grand Slams before turning 22. That's the kind of situation that makes your legacy as a coach. That's the kind of gig that gets you inducted into halls of fame and interviewed for documentaries decades later. Spanish journalist Angel Garcia reported that 5 to 6 coaches immediately made themselves available to work with Carlos. Not hinted, not quietly expressed interest, actively made themselves available. That's how coveted this position is. And we're not talking about random academy coaches looking for a break. We're talking about proven winners, people who've coached Grand Slam champions, people with track records and reputations and credibility. And Carlos looked at all of them and said no. Not, "Let me think about it." Not, "Send me your resume." Just no. Thanks, but no thanks. I'm good. He's sticking with Samuel Lopez, who joined his team at the start of last year and has now been promoted from assistant to head coach. And the tennis world is absolutely losing its mind over this decision. Let's be clear about who Samuel Lopez is, because context matters. He's been at the Ferrero Tennis Academy for years. He's been around Carlos for a while. He knows the system, knows the routines, knows how Carlos operates. But he's never been a head coach at this level. He's never guided a player through a full season as the #1 ranked player in the world. He's never had to manage the pressure, the expectations, the constant travel, the media obligations, the strategic decisions that come with being at the absolute top of the sport. And now he's being thrown into the deep end with the highest stakes imaginable. The easy move, the safe move, the move that literally everyone expected Carlos to make was to bring in a big name. Someone who's been there before. Someone who knows how to handle the pressure of coaching a world #1. Someone with a proven track record of Grand Slam success. But Carlos didn't take the easy move. He took the loyal move. And that's either incredibly smart or incredibly reckless, depending on who you ask. Here's where the sarcasm needs to kick in. The tennis establishment is completely baffled by this decision. Because in their world, you always hire the biggest name available. You always go with proven experience. You always choose the safe option that looks good on paper and gives you plausible deniability if things go wrong. Well, we hired a Hall of Fame coach. What more could we do? That's the standard playbook. Carlos just threw that playbook in the trash. And the thing is, you can actually make a solid argument for why this decision makes sense. Lopez knows Carlos. He understands how he trains, how he recovers, how he thinks, how he processes pressure. They've already worked together for a full season. There's existing chemistry, there's trust, there's familiarity. When you're dealing with the insane schedule and pressure of being world #1, having someone you're completely comfortable with isn't a small thing. It's actually massive. Compare that to bringing in some legendary coach who's worked with other champions. Sure, they have experience. Sure, they have credibility. But now you're starting from scratch on the relationship side. You're learning each other's communication styles. You're figuring out boundaries. You're establishing trust. And you're doing all of that while also trying to maintain your #1 ranking and compete for Grand Slams. That's a lot of moving pieces. That's a lot of risk. But let's be honest about the other side of this equation. Lopez has never done this job before at this level. He's never been the guy making final decisions during Grand Slam matches. He's never been the one getting second-guessed by media when things go wrong. He's never had to manage the intense pressure that comes with coaching the face of tennis. And now he's getting all of that thrown at him at once. If Carlos stumbles early in the season, if he loses matches he's expected to win, if the results aren't there immediately, the criticism is going to be absolutely brutal. Former Alcaraz coach Kiko Navarro gave an interesting perspective on this situation. He believes Lopez will stay as head coach, but he thinks they'll need to add a second figure to help manage the ridiculous modern tennis calendar. The season is very long with a lot of travel, Navarro explained. I think a second person will be needed. That's actually a smart compromise. Lopez leads the team, but you bring in additional support to handle specific areas, or to provide a fresh perspective when needed. And maybe that second coach ends up being a bigger name. Maybe that's how the Alcaraz team threads the needle between loyalty to Lopez and practical recognition that they need more firepower. But even if that happens, the message is clear. Lopez is the boss. Everyone else is support staff. Carlos has made his choice about who he trusts to lead him through this next chapter. Now let's talk about what this decision says about where Carlos is in his career, because that's the really interesting subtext. When he started with Ferrero, he was a teenager. He was moldable. He was learning. He needed someone to shape his game and his mentality. Ferrero did that brilliantly. He turned Carlos from a promising junior into one of the best players on the planet. But at some point, the dynamic changes. At some point, the player becomes fully formed. They know who they are. They know what works for them. They don't need a mentor anymore. They need a partner. By choosing Lopez over big-name alternatives, Carlos is essentially saying, I know who I am as a player. I don't need someone to rebuild me or reinvent me. I need someone who understands what I've already built and can help me maintain and refine it. That's a mature perspective. That's a player taking ownership of his career rather than deferring to outside authority. But it's also a player betting on himself in a way that could absolutely blow up in his face if the results don't come. The tennis establishment hates this kind of move because it doesn't follow the script. The script says you hire the proven commodity. You bring in the Hall of Famer. You make the move that looks smart to outsiders even if it doesn't actually make practical sense for your specific situation. Carlos is doing the opposite. He's making the move that makes sense to him internally, regardless of how it looks externally. That takes confidence. It also takes a willingness to accept the criticism if things go sideways. And let's be real, if Carlos struggles at the Australian Open or has a rough start to the season, the narrative is going to be absolutely vicious. He should have hired a real coach. He's too young to make these decisions. The father is ruining his career. All the hot takes are already locked and loaded, just waiting for the first sign of trouble. That's the price of going against conventional wisdom. You don't get the benefit of the doubt. But here's the thing that the critics are missing. Carlos has already proven he can make smart decisions about his career. He's not some naive kid who doesn't understand the stakes. He's won 4 Grand Slams by age 21. He's been #1 in the world multiple times. He's competed at the highest level against the best players on the planet and won consistently. He's earned the right to trust his own judgment. And his judgment is telling him that continuity with Lopez is better than starting over with a stranger, no matter how impressive that stranger's resume might be. The reports say Carlos has already started his preseason preparations back at the Ferrero Tennis Academy. Same facility, same support staff, same routines. The only thing that's changed is that Ferrero isn't there. Everything else is exactly the same. That's by design. Carlos is trying to minimize disruption during a period of transition. He's betting that keeping everything else stable will help offset any adjustment period with the coaching change. That's smart planning. That's thoughtful decision-making. That's not the behavior of someone making emotional or reckless choices. His first official test comes at the Australian Open, and that tournament is going to be absolutely crucial for setting the tone. If Carlos comes out strong, if he plays well, if he looks comfortable and confident, all the doubts about this coaching decision will evaporate. People will say, "See? He knew what he was doing. Lopez was the right choice." But if he struggles, if he looks uncertain, if the results aren't there, the second guessing will be deafening. This is what happens when you choose loyalty over competence. He needs a real coach. The narratives are already written. The only question is which one becomes reality. Let's also address the elephant in the room, the role of Carlos's father in all of this. The reports suggest he was a major factor in the split with Ferrero. He's clearly involved in major career decisions. And whenever a parent is heavily involved in a tennis player's career, people get nervous. Because we've all seen situations where parental involvement becomes problematic, where emotions override logic, where family dynamics interfere with professional decisions. The tennis world is full of cautionary tales about parents who thought they knew better than experienced coaches and ended up derailing their kids' careers. But here's the counter-argument. Carlos's father has been involved this entire time. He was there during the rise with Ferrero. He was there for all 4 Grand Slam victories. He was there when Carlos became number 1. So maybe, just maybe, he actually does know what he's doing. Maybe he understands his son better than outsiders give him credit for. Maybe his involvement is actually a strength rather than a weakness. It's possible. But it's also the kind of thing that only gets proven in retrospect. The decision to turn down all those coaching offers is fascinating because it reveals Carlos's priorities. He could have gone for the biggest name. He could have made the splashy hire that gets headlines and makes everyone feel confident. He could have chosen the safe option. Instead, he chose trust. He chose continuity. He chose chemistry. Those are the values driving this decision. Whether those values translate to continued success on the court is the question everyone's waiting to see answered. Carlos Alcaraz just made the biggest gamble of his career, and we're all about to find out if it pays off or blows up spectacularly. He turned down proven champions to bet on loyalty and chemistry, and that's either brilliant or reckless depending on how the next few months play out. If you want to see how this all unfolds, smash that like button and subscribe for all the drama.